Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use the new EDI X12 module to process an 850 document, which is a purchase order in EDI terminology. What I've built here is a flow that takes a set of EDI messages from a directory. It then extracts all the different purchase orders, creates a CSV report for us to use about those purchase orders, and then in return, it sends a functional acknowledgement back to the partner, which is a 997 or can optionally be a 999. And this indicates to the partner that we've received the message successfully, or if they send us a faulty message, it tells them what the problems were in the message. So let's take a little bit of a look more in depth how this flow works. So at the start here, we've got a very simple file endpoint. This looks for files on the input directory and will then pass them along into the flow. The next step is the EDI module itself. And what this does is it takes the stream, the actual file data, and it converts it into a message that you can work with inside of Mule that has parsed all of the EDI segments into a much more machine workable way. So you can use it in your flow to do routing, so you can use it to do data transformation, and so on. So you can see here in this message, it's taken this document and it's given it a structure where you can see it's under transaction sets. Then we have the version of X12 that we're using, the 5010 version. And then you have the different potential files that you can receive. And here's a list of 850 transactions that might be in that list. Then within that 850, there are different segments that you can go and access, such as the purchase order loop, which detail all of the orders that will be in that purchase order. So the way this works is underneath the covers, we have something called the EDI schema language. In the EDI schema language is a proprietary language that we've built, which makes it very easy to describe EDI messages. It's built on YAML, and it's just a very simple text-based file. And what you can see here is it describes that overall structure. So here we've got an X12 document that is a 4010 version, and then it has a particular structure that is delineated here. And so you can see it describes each of those different segments and the order of those segments. So there's a start segment, there's a BG segment, there's a current segment, and so on. And in the schema language, you see that we've configured the usage of the segment, whether it's mandatory or optional, the number of times this segment can be received. The nice thing about this is that you can actually create your own version of these schemas as well, and extend these schemas for your particular implementation convention. For example, if you wanted this ref segment to be mandatory and not optional, we could go and create our own version of the schema, which is our custom 850 document like this. And then we can extend the original 850 like that, and then we can just actually edit this document and change the usage from optional to mandatory. But we're going to take this out of the box schema that we've got here and configure our EDI module to use it. So let's go back over to our flow. This flow, or this connector, actually has a pre-built connector configuration here for one of our trading partners. And in this case, we're taking Walmart as an example. And we're going to take a look at this. So you've got a lot of different settings in here. So there are general settings. The schemas that we use is a primary one here. And you can see here I've actually registered two different ones that might be valid inputs. So an 850 or 855. And these are pre-built schemas which we've prepackaged for the different X12 versions. And so you can just reuse those, or you can extend those, as I mentioned earlier. You can also configure your own partner IDs, your trading partners IDs, which I've configured here to be sender, different validation options, and also whether or not you want to generate a 997 or a 999 functional acknowledgement. And then you can configure the writer options as well. So the delimiters, the interchange control numbers, and so on. So what we've done is configured this EDI module to read in that document and output it based on those settings. And along the way, it's actually going to validate the document according to that connector configuration as well. So if you get an receiver ID or a duplicate interchange control number, it's going to validate that according to the settings that you've configured. After we've received and validated the document, we can work with it like we would any other document inside Mule. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look through this document and we're going to find all of the 850 transactions here and extract them. And we're going to put those into the batch job so we can process them. This batch job then is going to allow us to generate a CSV report for each one of these 850 documents. So extracting the 850s is fairly simple. What we're doing is just taking the transaction sets 5010, 850 and running a data weave transform, which is setting the output payload to the list of 850 documents. And you can see that here it's reflected in the output. It's in a list and it has an interchange and everything else inside the incoming purchase order. Each one of those purchase orders then is going to go into the batch job, into this step here, which is going to process all the different line items. So this payload now is the 850 document, and then inside the 850 document there's a PO1 loop, and then we can iterate through each of those essentially line items. So that's exactly what this transformation does. It loops through the input. So we're going to do a payload detail and then the PO1 loop. And for each item inside that loop, we're going to create a row in the output CSV file with an order ID and amount. So the order ID we're mapping to the P0101, which is the order ID inside the 850 document. And the amount, we're taking the price times the quantity, which is the PO104 and PO102 respectively. And then that is going to turn into an output that you see over here. And what we can do is actually change the sample input by going over here. And this is going to allow us to maybe generate some metadata that is a little bit more meaningful. So I'm going to expand this and I'm going to find the P01 segment, and then we can change that metadata to something a little bit more meaningful. So here we are, we're inside the detail, and inside PO1 what we can do is change this to some ID, and we'll change our price to 10, and then we'll leave our quantity at 2. We'll hit save and we'll see our output is reflected there dynamically. This is a very easy way to test maybe different combinations of your EDI inputs. Once we've generated that CSV file, we're just going to write it back out and continue on just by logging that we finished processing these purchase orders successfully. The final step here is going to be the flow, which sends the acknowledgement back to the partner. This acknowledgement is going to tell them whether or not we have received the EDI file successfully or if there were errors processing it. When reading in the EDI message originally, you'll notice that on this message here, on the output of the EDI module, there's something called the functional acts generated. This is essentially the 997s that the module has generated for you based on the validation rules that you've configured. And what we need to do then is extract those 997s to create a new outgoing EDI message. So the way we do that is, again, with data weave, and we've got a very simple data weave transformation here, which creates an outgoing message that has transaction sets of the 5010 version with a list of 997s. And we map those 997s to the functional acts that were generated earlier on in our EDI connector. Then once data weave has written that out into a set of objects, we invoke the write method on the connector, and this will output it to a stream for us to use and write to a file. And that's going to dump it in the acknowledgements directory just under a file called ack.edi. So let's run this now. I'm going to right click on the project, click Run Project, and this is going to start Mule. And what I'm going to do is give this a input, which is my EDI sample document. And this has, my sender and receiver code. It also has my purchase order information down here. And so we'll see what this outputs when we drop it into the input directory. So you can see over here, Mule is processing it. It actually processed all those purchase orders. That was the log statement we entered in earlier. And then if we refresh this reports directory, we should be able to see our CSV file exported. And sure enough, you can see that we've got one line item in here that corresponds to the one line item in our input document. We can also go over to the acknowledgements directory and see that there was an acknowledgement generated here. And this again corresponds to our sender and receiver IDs and has all the EDI document for your partner to read and determine whether or not we've processed that message successfully. So that concludes a brief overview of how the EDI modules work inside Mule. You can find out more information by going over to our documentation at docs.mulesoft.com/anypoint-B2B. And here you can get very detailed information about how to configure the X12 module, what transaction types we support, an in-depth example that you can download, which is the one that we just looked at, and the different release notes for the different modules. Enjoy!